A widowed rancher with nothing but a failing ranch and a young daughter to protect made one choice on a stormy night: to let a desperate stranger sleep in his barn. He didn't ask her name, he didn't ask questions, he just showed her mercy. But that girl, she was running from an empire, the daughter of the richest cattle baron in all of Texas. And when her father's men came looking, when the truth was revealed, Caleb Stone would have to decide: step aside and let her world reclaim her, or fight for something worth more than all the cattle and gold in the West. This is the story of how one act of kindness became a battle between two worlds, and how a poor man's honor proved richer than any fortune. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Caleb Stone said, his voice cutting through the howling wind as rain hammered the dirt road into mud. "This ain't safe country for anyone to be wandering at this hour." The girl spun around, startled. Her dress was soaked through, her dark hair plastered against her face. Her eyes, wide with fear, darted from him to the shadows beyond the road, like she was expecting someone, or afraid someone might appear. "I don't need your help," she shot back, her voice sharp despite the trembling in her hands. Caleb stepped his horse closer, rain dripping from the brim of his weathered hat. He was still in his work clothes, dusty chaps, a torn shirt, boots caked in dried mud from a long day mending fences. The kind of day that never seemed to end on a ranch held together by spit and stubbornness. "Didn't say you needed it," Caleb replied evenly. "But standing on a road in the middle of the night during a storm, that's how folks end up dead or worse." She hugged herself tighter, shivering violently now. He could see the bruise forming on her cheek, the torn hem of her dress, the way her boots, fine leather he noticed, were scuffed and muddy beyond repair. "What happened?" he asked, gentler this time. She looked down, jaw clenched. "I was robbed. They took my horse, my bag, everything." Caleb let the silence sit between them for a moment, watching her. She was proud, that much was clear, proud and terrified. "You got people in town? Family?" She shook her head quickly. "No, no one." He studied her face. She was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth, but he'd learned long ago that desperate people had their reasons. "All right," he said, dismounting. "My ranch is about a mile west. It ain't much, but it's dry. You can sleep in the barn tonight. Come morning, you can figure out what's next." "I don't want charity," she said, lifting her chin. "Good," Caleb said, walking his horse forward, "'cause I ain't offering it. I'm offering a roof. What you do with it is your business." She hesitated, her pride warring with her exhaustion. Then her knees buckled slightly, just enough for him to see how close she was to collapsing. "Fine," she whispered. They walked in silence. Caleb kept a respectful distance, leading his horse by the reins. The girl stumbled twice, but each time she caught herself before he could offer a hand. When they reached the stone ranch, it was barely visible through the rain. A small house with a sagging porch, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, and a few scattered pens where a handful of cattle huddled against the storm. Caleb pushed open the barn door and gestured inside. "You can take the loft. There's hay up there, and some old blankets in the corner. It ain't the Grand Hotel, but it'll keep you warm." She stepped inside, water dripping from her clothes onto the dirt floor. Caleb disappeared for a moment, then returned with a wool blanket, a tin cup, and a canteen of water. He set them on a wooden crate near the ladder. "There's a pump outside if you need more water in the morning," he said, "and the house is just across the way. My daughter's asleep, so keep the noise down if you need anything." The girl stared at him, confused by his lack of questions, his absence of judgment. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Caleb adjusted his hat, rain still dripping from the brim. "Because if my little girl ever found herself lost and scared on a night like this, I'd hope to God someone would do the same for her." The girl flinched at the word daughter, but said nothing. Caleb turned toward the door. "Name's Caleb, by the way. Caleb Stone." She hesitated. "Sarah." He nodded once. "Get some rest, Sarah." Then he walked out into the storm, closing the barn door behind him. Inside, Sarah stood alone in the dim light, clutching the blanket to her chest. For the first time in days, she felt something she hadn't expected: safe. Sarah woke to the sound of laughter, bright, innocent, and completely out of place in the rough world she'd been running through. She sat up slowly, her body aching from sleeping on hay, and blinked against the morning light streaming through the cracks in the barn walls. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clean, cool morning that smelled of wet earth and grass. Outside, she heard it again, a child's voice, singing something off-key. Sarah climbed down from the loft carefully, brushing straw from her dress. When she pushed open the barn door, she found a little girl crouched near a chicken coop, tossing feed from a small wooden bucket. The girl couldn't have been more than 7, with wild blonde curls tied back in a crooked ribbon and freckles scattered across her nose. She wore a simple cotton dress, patched at the knees, and boots 2 sizes too big. When she spotted Sarah, her face lit up. "Oh, you're the lady Daddy said was staying in the barn." Sarah blinked. "He told you about me?" The girl nodded enthusiastically. "Uh-huh. He said a nice lady needed a place to sleep 'cause she got lost in the storm. That's you, right?" "I suppose it is," Sarah said, a small smile tugging at her lips despite herself. The girl abandoned her bucket and skipped over, looking Sarah up and down with open curiosity. "I'm Annie. Annie Stone. What's your name?" "Sarah." "Just Sarah?" "Just Sarah." Annie grinned. "That's pretty." "You hungry?" "Daddy's making breakfast. Well, trying to make breakfast. Sometimes he burns it." Before Sarah could respond, a voice called from the house. "Annie, don't go bothering our guest now." Caleb appeared on the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. He was dressed simply: clean shirt, suspenders, and the same worn boots from the night before. His hair was still damp, like he'd dunked his head in the water trough. "She's not bothering me," Sarah said quickly. Annie grabbed Sarah's hand. "Come on, you gotta eat with us." Sarah hesitated, but Annie was already tugging her toward the house. Caleb stepped aside as they entered, his expression unreadable. The inside of the house was small, one main room that served as kitchen, dining, and living space, with a couple of doors leading to what Sarah assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean but worn, pieced together from mismatched furniture and hand-me-downs. A pot of coffee sat on the old iron stove, and Caleb was in the middle of frying eggs in a skillet that had seen better days. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the table. Sarah sat across from Annie, who was already chattering about the chickens, the new calf in the pen, and how her doll's arm had fallen off last week, but Daddy had sewn it back on. Caleb set plates in front of them, eggs, biscuits, and a few strips of bacon that were crispy to the point of being charred. Annie poked at her bacon with a fork and whispered loudly to Sarah, "See? Told you he burns stuff." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "I heard that." "I know," Annie said, grinning. Sarah picked up her fork and took a bite. The eggs were overcooked, the biscuits hard, and the bacon, well, it crunched, but she ate every bite. Caleb watched her from across the table, sipping his coffee. "You don't have to eat it if it's that bad." "It's not bad," Sarah said quietly. And strangely, she meant it. After breakfast, Annie insisted on showing Sarah the ranch. They walked through the small property, past the chicken coop, the vegetable garden that was more weeds than crops, and the pen where a skinny cow grazed lazily. "This is Bessie," Annie said proudly. "She's our best cow. Well, our only cow, but Daddy says she's still the best." Sarah looked around at the struggling ranch, the broken fence posts, the peeling paint on the house. This was poverty, real, grinding poverty, and yet Annie was smiling. Caleb was calm. There was no shouting, no tension, no cold silence like the kind that filled her father's mansion. "Do you like it here?" Sarah asked suddenly. Annie looked up at her, confused by the question. Course I do. It's home. Sarah stared at the little girl, something tightening in her chest. Home. She couldn't remember the last time any place had felt like that. By mid-morning, Sarah found herself standing in the middle of the barn, staring at a pile of dirty saddles, bridles, and tack that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in months. Caleb stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You said you wanted to earn your keep. Well, this is it. Leather needs oiling. Metal needs polishing. There's supplies in that crate. Sarah looked at the pile, then at her hands that had never done a day's hard work in her life. I don't know how. Then you'll learn, Caleb said simply. He grabbed a rag and a tin of oil, kneeling beside an old saddle. Watch. You work the oil into the leather in circles, like this. Not too much, not too little. Just enough to keep it from cracking. She knelt beside him, awkwardly taking a rag. Her first attempt was clumsy. Too much oil, uneven strokes. The leather looked worse than before. Caleb didn't laugh. He just guided her hand. Gentler. Think of it like brushing a horse's mane. Steady, patient. Sarah tried again. This time it was better. Barely. They worked in silence for a while, the smell of leather oil filling the barn. Sarah's hands grew sore. Her back ached from kneeling, and her dress, already ruined, was now stained with grease and dirt. Why do you do this? She asked suddenly. All of it, the ranch, the work, for what? It's barely holding together. Caleb didn't look up. Because it's mine. And because Annie needs a home, not a handout. But you could... Sarah stopped herself. Could what? Caleb asked, glancing at her. Sell it? Go work for someone else? Let someone else decide my life? She said nothing. I'd rather break my back on my own land than live easy on someone else's terms, he continued. Maybe that don't make sense to you, but it's the truth. Sarah looked down at the saddle in her hands, something stirring in her chest, something uncomfortable, unfamiliar. Respect. The next day, Caleb took her into town. Red Creek was a dusty, sun-baked settlement with a main street lined by a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a doctor's office. It wasn't much, but it was alive. People greeted each other by name, tipped their hats, shared news. Caleb tied his horse outside the trading post and turned to Sarah. Rosa Martinez runs this place. She's a friend. I'm going to ask if she needs help around the store while you're figuring things out. You don't have to do that, Sarah said quietly. I know, Caleb replied, but standing around my ranch ain't going to help you move forward. Inside, the store smelled of tobacco, leather, and spices. A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a kind smile looked up from behind the counter. Caleb Stone, Rosa said warmly. And who's this? This is Sarah, Caleb said. She's staying at the ranch for a bit. Was wondering if you could use an extra hand. Rosa studied Sarah for a long moment, then nodded. Can you count? Yes. Can you sweep? I can learn. Rosa smiled. Good enough. Be here tomorrow at dawn. The work was harder than Sarah ever imagined. She swept floors until her arms burned. She stacked crates until her back screamed. She served customers who barked orders at her, complained about prices, and occasionally knocked over displays she just organized. One afternoon, an older man shoved a list at her. I need this by sundown. Don't mess it up. Sarah gathered the items with shaking hands, but when she tried to wrap them, the paper tore. She tried again. It tore again. She stood there, frozen, staring at her useless, trembling fingers. Rosa appeared beside her, gently taking the package. Here, watch. She wrapped it smoothly, efficiently, then handed it back. Try again. Sarah did. This time, it held. Better, Rosa said. You're learning. That evening, Sarah walked back to the ranch, exhausted and covered in dust. Her feet ached, Her dress was beyond saving, and every muscle in her body felt like it had been wrung out. But when she stepped into the barn and saw Caleb waiting with a clean blanket and a cup of water, she didn't complain. "Long day, he asked. "The longest," she admitted. He nodded. "That's honest work for you. Breaks you down so it can build you back up." Sarah sank onto a bale of hay, staring at her raw, reddened hands. For the first time in her life, she'd earned something, and it felt good. Sarah was sweeping the front porch when she felt it, the weight of being watched. She looked up and saw a man across the street, leaning against a post outside the saloon. He was dressed in black, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, and a rifle slung casually across his back. He was staring directly at her. Her heart stopped. She turned quickly, pretending she hadn't noticed, and hurried back inside the trading post. Through the window, she watched him push off the post and start walking, not toward her, but in the direction of the ranch. "Rosa," Sarah said, her voice tight. "I need to leave early today." Rosa looked up from her ledger, eyebrows raised. "You feeling all right?" I need to go." Rosa studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Go on then." Sarah didn't run. Running would draw attention, but she moved fast, keeping her head down as she made her way out of town. By the time she reached the ranch, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the property. Caleb was in the barn, repairing a broken gate hinge. "You're back early," he said without looking up. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, something caught her eye, a glint of metal in the fading light. She turned. There, lying half-covered in straw near the workbench, was her necklace, the one she'd hidden, the one she thought she'd lost. It must have fallen out of her bag days ago. Caleb's voice cut through the silence. "I found that this morning." Sarah froze. He set down his tools and stood, wiping grease from his hands. His expression was unreadable. "That's not something a drifter carries around." She said nothing. He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Who are you really?" Sarah swallowed hard. The silence was louder than any shout. "I'm someone who walked away from a world where everything has a price except love," she said finally. "That's all you need to know." He stared at her for a long moment. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie. I left things out." Caleb's voice dropped. "That's the same thing." Sarah's lips trembled, but she turned away, her hands shaking. "Do you know what it's like to be watched every moment of your life? To be told who to love, where to go, what to become?" "No," Caleb said, "but I know what it's like to be honest with someone who isn't." They stood there in silence, the hum of machines the only sound between them. Sarah felt tears rising, but refused to let them fall. Before either could speak again, the door swung open. A man in a leather jacket and ball cap walked in, holding up a piece of paper with a sketch on it. His eyes locked on Sarah. "There she is," he muttered. "You've been missing for 5 days, Miss Blackwood. Your daddy's offering a nice reward to know where you're hiding." Jack stepped forward. "Hey, get out of here." "Relax, friend." "I'm just doing my job," the man said, tucking the paper away. Sarah backed away, panic blooming in her chest. Caleb moved quickly. He grabbed Sarah by the arm and pulled her toward the back exit. "Go, now." They burst out the rear door, Sarah panting, her mind spinning. Caleb didn't stop running until they reached his truck. "What about Annie?" Sarah gasped. "She's at Rosa's place in town." "I'll get her." Within the hour, Annie was with Rosa Martinez, confused but safe. Caleb had explained only that Sarah needed help, and Rosa, bless her, asked no questions. "She'll keep her safe," Jack said. "You trust her?" "With my life," Caleb said, his tone firm. Rosa opened the door before he could knock, nodding silently. "Come in, mija. I'll keep the little one." Caleb leaned down and kissed Annie's forehead. "You'll stay with Miss Rosa for a little while, okay? Just like a sleepover." Annie nodded. "Okay, Daddy." Caleb straightened, exhaled deeply, and turned to Sarah. Let's go." They drove out of the neighborhood, not speaking until they were on the edge of town. Sarah stared at him in the silence, guilt and gratitude battling in her chest. He kept one hand on the reins, the other resting lightly on his thigh, fingers flexing. Sarah realized then that his shirt sleeve was torn. "Your arm," she said suddenly. "What happened?" He glanced down at the bruise forming along his bicep. "The guy pushed me when I tried to block him. Why didn't you say anything?" Caleb shrugged. "As long as you and Annie are safe, I can deal with a bruise." Sarah looked at him, her eyes welling again. In that moment she realized something. Caleb didn't protect her because of who she might be. He did it because of who he was. They returned to the house just after sunset. Caleb stopped the wagon a block away to be cautious, scanning for anything that didn't belong. Sarah sat beside him, silent, her nerves tight. The ranch looked quiet, too quiet. Caleb motioned for her to stay in the wagon, but Sarah had already climbed down. "It's okay," she said. "If someone's come, I need to face it." They walked together toward the house, and then they saw them. 3 black carriages idled in front of the property, sleek and imposing beneath the fading light. Armed outriders stood by the horses. The front door was open. Caleb quickened his pace, instinct kicking in. He stepped in front of Sarah protectively just as a man emerged from inside. He was older, tall with silver hair, impeccably combed back, and a heavy presence that filled the space like thunderclouds. "Sarah," he said coldly, "get in the carriage." Sarah froze. Caleb didn't. "You her father?" "I am Montgomery Blackwood," the man said, his eyes sharp. "You're the man who's been harboring my daughter." "I'm the man who gave her a place to stay when she had nowhere else to go," Caleb replied. Montgomery took a slow step forward, scanning the ranch with distaste. This place, this life, it's beneath her. You can't possibly think she belongs here." "She made that decision," Caleb said. "Not me. You can't keep her here." "I'm not keeping anyone," Caleb said, his tone harder now. "But I'm not handing her over like she's a piece of property either." Montgomery's eyes narrowed. "You don't know who she is." "I don't care who she is," Caleb shot back. "I know what kind of person she is, and I know she's safe here." Sarah stepped between them, her voice steady though her hands shook. "Father, stop." "You've made your point," Montgomery said, gesturing to his men. "Now come home." "This is home," she whispered. "No," he said firmly. "This is where you ran to, not where you belong." Caleb turned to Sarah. "You don't have to go." But she was already looking at the carriage. Her eyes were wet. "I think I do." "No one's forcing you," Caleb said. "Yes, they are," she replied, voice breaking. "Just not with words." He understood. The pressure wasn't physical. It was the weight of a life she'd tried to escape crashing down again. She stepped back from him slowly, like she was afraid of what would happen if she moved too quickly. He didn't follow. She turned toward the carriage. One of the bodyguards opened the door. Montgomery said nothing. His job was done. Sarah paused at the edge of the property, her back still to Caleb. "I'm sorry," she said softly, not turning around. He didn't respond. Couldn't. The door closed behind her, the sound like a final chapter being shut. Caleb stood on the porch as the carriages drove away, their lights bleeding into the night. His fists were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. Inside, the house was quiet, empty in a way it hadn't felt in weeks. He didn't say a word. He just closed the door and turned off the porch light. 2 days later, the carriages came. Sarah was helping Annie feed the chickens when she heard them. The rumble of wheels, the sharp crack of a whip, the synchronized thunder of hooves on hard earth. She looked up and felt her stomach drop. 3 black carriages rolled toward the ranch, flanked by armed outriders. At the front, a coach trimmed in polished brass and rich leather, a vehicle that screamed wealth and power. Annie squinted at the dust cloud. "Who's that?" Sarah's voice caught in her throat. "Go inside, Annie. Now." "But now." The girl's face crumpled, confused and hurt, but she ran toward the house. Caleb emerged from the barn, his face grim. He'd been expecting this. They both had. The carriages stopped in front of the house. Dutch dismounted first, opening the door of the lead coach. A man stepped out. Montgomery Blackwood was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than Caleb's entire ranch. His silver hair was swept back, his jawline sharp, his eyes cold and calculating. He carried a gold-tipped cane, not because he needed it, but because it looked good. He surveyed the ranch with barely concealed disdain, his gaze lingering on the sagging porch, the patched roof, the thin cattle in the pen. Then his eyes found Sarah. "There you are," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Do you have any idea what you've put me through?" Sarah stood her ground, though her hands trembled at her sides. "I didn't ask you to come." "You didn't have to," Montgomery said, stepping closer. "You're my daughter, my responsibility, and you've been living in this." He gestured dismissively at the ranch. Caleb stepped forward. "She's been safe here." Montgomery turned his gaze on Caleb, looking him up and down like he was appraising livestock. "And you are?" "Caleb Stone. This is my land." "Your land," Montgomery repeated, almost amused. "Tell me, Mr. Stone, how much is this land worth? A few $100s? 1,000 if you're lucky?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "It's worth what I've put into it." "Sentiment," Montgomery said dismissively. "That's all you have. Sentiment and dirt." "Father, stop," Sarah said, her voice shaking. Montgomery ignored her, still focused on Caleb. "You took in my daughter, fed her, sheltered her. For that, I'll compensate you. Name a price." Caleb's eyes darkened. "I don't want your money. Everyone wants money, Mr. Stone. It's just a question of how much." "Not me." Montgomery smiled coldly. "Then you're either a liar or a fool." "I'm neither," Caleb said evenly. "I'm just a man who helped someone who needed it. I don't expect payment for doing what's right." Montgomery studied him for a long moment, then turned to Sarah. "Get in the carriage." "No," Sarah said. "Excuse me." "I said no." Her voice was stronger now. "I'm not going back." Montgomery's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do," Sarah said. "I'm choosing to stay." Montgomery stepped closer to her, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think you can survive out here, in this poverty? This filth?" "It's not filth," Sarah said, her eyes welling with tears. "It's honest. It's real. It's more of a home than that mansion ever was." Montgomery's face darkened. He turned to Caleb. "What did you do to her? Fill her head with nonsense about noble poverty?" "I didn't do anything," Caleb said quietly. "She learned on her own." Montgomery laughed bitterly. "You think this is love? This fantasy you've built?" Sarah flinched. "She's confused," Montgomery continued, looking at Caleb. "She's romanticized hardship because she's never truly lived it. Give her a month and she'll be begging to come home." Caleb said nothing. Montgomery turned back to Sarah. "I'm offering you one chance. Come home now, and we forget this ever happened. Stay here and you'll have nothing, no inheritance, no family, no future." Sarah's tears spilled over. "I'd rather have nothing than live in a cage." Montgomery's expression turned to stone. "Then you're no daughter of mine." The words hung in the air like a sentence. Sarah felt her knees weaken, but she didn't fall. Montgomery turned toward the carriage, then paused. "1 week," he said without looking back. "I'll give you 1 week to come to your senses. After that, I'm cutting you off completely. No money, no name, nothing." He climbed into the carriage and slammed the door. Dutch tipped his hat to Caleb. "Sorry about this, Stone. Just business." The carriages pulled away, leaving Sarah standing in the dirt, tears streaming down her face. Caleb walked over to her slowly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she whispered. He wanted to reach for her, to tell her it would be okay, but he didn't, because he wasn't sure it would be. That night, Sarah lay in the barn loft, staring at the ceiling. She'd given up everything. Her name, her wealth, her family. And for what? A life of back-breaking work on a failing ranch, with a man who might not even want her there? She closed her eyes, doubt creeping in like a cold wind. Maybe her father was right. Maybe she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. The week passed in tense silence. Sarah worked harder than ever, at the trading post, around the ranch, anywhere she could make herself useful. But something had shifted. Caleb was polite, even kind, but there was distance now, a wall she couldn't break through. He didn't meet her eyes the way he used to, didn't linger in conversation, didn't smile when Annie made them both laugh. It was like he was preparing himself for her to leave. Maybe he was right to. On the 8th day, Sarah woke to find Annie's bed empty. She walked into the main room and found Caleb pacing, his face drawn with worry. "What's wrong, sir?" Sarah asked. "Annie's sick," he said, not looking at her. "Started last night, fever, chills. I thought it would pass, but—" He didn't finish. Sarah rushed into Annie's room. The little girl lay curled under blankets, her face pale and slick with sweat. Her breathing was shallow, labored. "Annie," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside the bed. The girl's eyes fluttered open. "Sarah, my chest hurts." Sarah's heart clenched. She turned to Caleb, who stood in the doorway. "We need to get her to the doctor, now." "I know," Caleb said, his voice hollow. "I'm hitching the wagon." Red Creek's doctor, Doc Henderson, was a grizzled man in his 60s who'd seen everything the frontier had to offer: gunshot wounds, snake bites, fever, cholera. But when he examined Annie, his expression grew grave. "It's pneumonia," he said quietly, washing his hands in a basin. "She needs medicine, rest, and constant care." "What kind of medicine?" Caleb asked. Doc reached into a cabinet and pulled out a small brown bottle. "This. But I'm low on stock. She'll need at least 3 bottles to fight this off. Maybe more." "How much?" Doc hesitated. $40 per bottle." The color drained from Caleb's face. Sarah's breath caught. She knew, everyone knew, that Caleb didn't have that kind of money. "I've got $12, Caleb said, pulling crumpled bills from his pocket. "I can get you the rest by the end of the month. I'll work extra shifts, sell some cattle." "Caleb," Doc said gently, "she needs it now, not in a month." Caleb stared at the bottle in Doc's hand, his jaw working. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Sarah stepped forward. "I'll pay for it." Both men turned to her. "What?" Caleb said. "I said I'll pay for it," Sarah repeated, her voice steady. "With what?" Caleb asked. "You don't have—" She reached into her pocket and pulled out the gold necklace. The one Caleb had found. The one she'd kept hidden. "This," she said, holding it up. "It's worth more than enough." Doc's eyes widened. That's easily $200, maybe more." Caleb shook his head. "Sarah, no. That's yours. It's the only thing you have left." "It's a piece of metal," Sarah said firmly. "Annie's life is worth more than that." "You don't understand," Caleb said, his voice tight. "If you sell that, you'll have nothing. No way back to your old life, no safety net." "I don't want my old life," Sarah said, her eyes locked on his. "I want her to live." For a moment, Caleb just stared at her, something breaking behind his eyes. Then he nodded. Doc took the necklace carefully. "I'll get you the medicine, and the change." "Keep the change," Sarah said. "Use it for someone else who needs it." That night, Sarah sat by Annie's bedside, gently wiping the girl's forehead with a cool cloth. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," Sarah replied without looking up. Caleb stepped into the room. "That necklace, it was your way out. Your father's world, your inheritance, it was all tied to that." "I know. And you gave it up. For us." Sarah finally looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed, but clear. "Because you're worth more than all of it." Caleb's throat tightened. He crossed the room and knelt beside her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough, "for pulling away, for doubting you. I was scared that you'd realize this life wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough." Sarah reached for his hand. "You're more than enough, Caleb. You're everything." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw it. The truth in her eyes. The choice she'd made, not out of desperation, but out of love. "I love you," he said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Sarah smiled through her tears. "I love you too." Annie stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about chickens. They both looked down at her and laughed quietly. "She's going to be okay," Sarah whispered. Caleb squeezed her hand. "Because of you." They sat together in the dim lamplight, hands intertwined, watching over the little girl who had brought them together. And for the first time in days, the future didn't feel so uncertain.